Welcome to Living Mirrors with Dr. James Cook. My guest this week is Elaine Pagels. Elaine is a historian of religion and a professor at Princeton University. She's the author of many books, including The Gnostic Gospels, Beyond Belief, The Secret Gospel of Thomas, and Why Religion? A Personal Story. In 2016, she was awarded the National Medal for the Arts from then US President Barack Obama. She's a leading expert on the Gnostic Gospels and early Christianity, which is what we talk about today. Hope you enjoy the conversation.
Okay, so before we start, just can you give me a little background of what interests you about this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
And what is your field?
so I'm in neuroscience, but I initially studied psychology as an undergraduate, and then specialized more and more in the kind of brain side of things. But my initial interest in this stuff came from, as a teenager, I was raised Catholic, but then I had it was actually when I was wrestling with a crisis of faith. I couldn't get over the level of metaphysical threat that there was around kind of original sin and the prospect of hell. And I was about 13 years old, and it was really, I was overly conscientious as a child, and it was really bothering me. And it effectively, the way I think about it now, is it effectively kind of baffled my rational mind, like in Zen Buddhism, where they have these koans, these paradoxes that are intended to disrupt the rational mind. And I had this amazing experience of just utter serenity and it was just the most profound experience of my life. And it just came from having this kind of silent mind experience. And from that moment on, I was very interested in the mind, but also in kind of spiritual experience. And I've tended to go down the route of understanding it naturalistically through science. So I'm very interested in mysticism of all religious kind of types. So I've interviewed kind of experts on Buddhism, and I've spoken to a few people on Christianity, and an amazing rabbi on Jewish mysticism. So yeah, I'm kind of exploring myself, because I'm not a religious scholar, but.
Well, that's very interesting. I thought of studying neuroscience in college too.
Oh, really?
But at that point, it was at such a different level. It was,
Right.
how the brain perceives red and green. And I thought, no, this is too slow. I mean, now neuroscience is very much more interesting, and cognitive psychology, which fascinates me too. But I thought studying the traditions themselves would be illuminating in different ways. So that's what I did. But you could, if you saw the latest book, Why Religion? I forget whether you mentioned it. It does talk about that, but also, and that I'm sure we'll talk about this, religion as experience, as the kind of experience you had.
Right,
not
exactly.
as a set of cognitive beliefs.
Yeah, that was the the thing that was liberating. I mean, in that experience, I was immediately released from all concerns around dogma. I suddenly felt that there were deep kind of experiential spiritual truths that you can discover yourself, but I didn't need to worry about other people telling me scary stories. Really, it was just like, okay, these are just things people are telling me. These are words, these are ideas, but the real
Yes.
thing is
Yes.
something you discover yourself that's not really, is kind of beyond words and ideas, I would say.
Exactly. And as you see, when I discovered the Gospel of Thomas, I said, okay, this makes sense to me, not the other.
Right. So maybe we can begin with a bit of your background, how you became interested in Christianity in the first place.
Well, like many people these days, I was brought up in a secular family. It was nominally Christian, but my father had given up the kind of ferocious Presbyterianism of his family for Darwin as soon as he encountered science. And he said, well, obviously, these stories are just silly old folk tales. Who needs that? Only ignorant people would be religious. So he just dismissed the whole thing as something that only uneducated people would have any interest in. And yet I love poetry and music and dance and all kinds of creative expressions that are very traditionally grew out of religious traditions, ancient ones, native ones, Christian, Jewish, all of them, Muslim, grew, they developed a great deal of poetry and music and ritual and all of the forms of imaginative exploration. So I loved those, but I never knew until I was 14. I wrote about this, that I was living in what I thought was a very boring town, Palo Alto in California, where Stanford University is. My father was on the faculty doing biology. And somebody said, let's go to San Francisco. Well, I thought anything in San Francisco would be more interesting than Palo Alto on a sleepy Sunday afternoon. So I went. What I didn't know, James, is that we were going to a Billy Graham crusade, a crusade for Christ. And that was alien to my background. But there in the sports stadium where I'd seen baseball games played, enormous, like 20,000 people, they were there to see this preacher. And he spoke very powerfully in many ways. And I was very moved by the music and the power of the speech and what he said. And so when the altar call came, I just thought, yes, I'm going down. I'm going to be born again. At 14, that seemed an irresistible invitation to start all over and have a different life. And so I did. And I joined an evangelical church. For about a year, I was intensely involved. And then I had to leave that church.
I wonder if that's an interesting form of rebellion if you have parents who are secular. Do you think that was part of it?
I do think that was part of it. The other side of it is that, a world in which rationalism is the highest form of understanding felt kind of like a flat earth. There wasn't another dimension, which I didn't know how to articulate. I wouldn't have known what a spiritual dimension was then. But that preaching opened up something that I felt was very powerful, which has to do with the imagination and has to do with the way we understand ourselves, in terms of poetry or visions or whatever.
Yeah, I think I like that, the way you put that. And I tend to think of science as kind of a map, but lived experience is the territory. So science and rationalism by itself is a bit dry, but the real stuff can be discovered through spiritual experience. So yeah, I like the way you put that.
Well, I like the way Einstein put it. He said you really need both. And later I married a theoretical physicist, a wonderful person, who said to me initially, why religion? I mean, why don't you do something with impact in the real world? And I said, why do you study elementary particles? I mean, they're invisible, you can't see them. I mean, what difference does it make? And we both realized we were interested in finding out something fundamental about the world we live in. And he came to enjoy the fact that I was studying religion, thinking about it, not just sort of caught in it as a kind of preacher, but I went to a secular university on purpose so that I could ask the questions I needed to ask.
Right. And was it when you were a teenager and you wrote about a car crash in which a friend died that was kind of pivotal for your relationship with this evangelical church?
Yes, it was. I mean, that's how I suddenly was precipitated out of that church, as suddenly as I'd been precipitated into it. It was an accident following a party in Palo Alto in which people were driving too fast. And one of my closest friends, who was 16 years old, was crushed when the car turned over. And in it, there were two other friends of ours. One was a musician, Jerry Garcia, and another was his close friend, Alan Trist, who was actually on a gap year from Westminster School right before he would go back to Cambridge University. And he had oddly become a friend of Jerry Garcia, who was a Latino street kid, sort of just out of the army, with a great gift for music. And they became very unlikely buddies and traveled around together and enjoyed each other. And so then I went back to my evangelical church, brokenhearted because our friend had been killed in the crash, a very extraordinary person. And my evangelical friend said, "That's terrible. Was he born again?" And I said, "No, he was Jewish." And they said, "Well, then he's in hell." And I felt like I had been sort of socked in the stomach. And I thought, well, wasn't Jesus Jew? What are you talking about? This was supposed to be about God's love. It has nothing to do with what you just said. So I just walked out of there and felt utterly desolated. I never went back. And it was years before I ever approached Christianity again. But when I did, it was not looking for faith. I was trying to say, what hit me then? What was it about those traditions that seemed to open up a dimension of experience that I hadn't even known existed? How did it start? How did the story of Jesus give birth to these institutions, which claim to know everything about him and claim to offer the only route to salvation, whatever they mean by that? So I wanted to understand the history. Like you, I wanted to take a secular approach and did.
Right.
Behind it, there was a spiritual quest involved, but I wasn't going to take that route.
And is it right that that car crash is where the band The Grateful Dead get their name from?
Yes, in fact, I was talking to someone, to Terry Gross on her program in the States called Fresh Air, about the crash. And I said that 5 years after the accident, Jerry Garcia started a band. I was in graduate school by then, but he started this band and he called it The Grateful Dead. And I thought, oh, that must be because he and Alan nearly got killed. And then somebody called up Alan Trist. By that time, Jerry had died. That was just a couple of years ago. And called up Alan Trist and said, some woman on radio was talking about how the band got their name, but that's not what happened. We know the story. And he said, you don't know the story, because it really was about the car crash. Jerry had said that was something that transformed his life, made him serious about his music. And after that, Alan Trist went back from Cambridge University studying anthropology to become the music publisher for the Grateful Dead for the next 35 years.
Wow. And with that generation, there were a lot of people, I guess, becoming interested in mysticism and kind of looking east, because Christianity seemed, at least, from the mainstream version of Christianity, seemed to lack that mysticism, right? Even in Judaism, there's kind of Kabbalah, and in Islam, there's kind of Sufi practices. There are these mystical strands, but I think a lot of people kind of turned to Buddhism, Hinduism, when they had these mystical experiences in the 60s to find some framework. But I guess what we'll be talking about today is these Gnostic traditions, right, that did exist, it seems, within Christianity, but were suppressed.
Yes, exactly. I mean, what we knew about Christianity, and you would know this, of course, is that it was mainly, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus as the Son of God? What do you believe? So it's a set of beliefs, it's a code of beliefs that was created, of course, in the 4th century, long after the death of Jesus. There was a Christian movement for 300 years before there was that kind of a creed. And as you suggested, I mean, that had very little to do with the experiences that people saw as genuinely transformative of our lives, because those had not been the focus of Orthodox Christianity. But when I went to graduate school at Harvard, suddenly I discovered there were many more gospels than we had ever known there were. They were all called heresy. And they were buried for nearly 2,000 years and found unexpectedly in a find in Upper Egypt in a cave. And those texts spoke to a very different dimension, just as you suggest.
And those texts are the Nag Hammadi library, is that right?
We call them that because they were found in a collection probably taken out of a monastery in the 4th century in the monastery library and hidden because the archbishop have said, okay, there are only 4 gospels that are genuine gospels. The rest of them are all heresy, which actually means choice. And choice was something the bishops didn't think was too good for people. So they shouldn't choose. They should listen to what we say. What's different? And we kept asking ourselves immediately, what's different about these other gospels that they censored, buried, burned, trashed, and basically had disappeared for 2,000? So I started to read the Gospel of Thomas. And I was very struck by a saying, it said, Jesus says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And I thought, you don't have to believe that. It's just true, But I took it psychologically. And I think it works on that level. And later I understood it was also a theological statement about a connection with the divine source within each person, which could become a way to find access to that source by oneself without an institution and before there were any of the kind that now exist.
Right. I think that's a powerful quote. And as you said, on a psychological level, it's insightful in an understanding, almost like a Jungian shadow understanding that there are parts of you that are hidden and unconscious and can drive you. I think as a quote from him was, if you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will kind of rule your life and you'll call it fate. So it's kind of acting from in the shadows and then bringing things to awareness. I think we're increasingly realizing is a core therapeutic principle. But then, as you say, I think the kind of the radiance of when we look inwards and we have these spiritual experiences, the light of consciousness is kind of in which everything's beheld. There's a lot of references to light, I think, in kind of mystical literature, right? And so I think you're right, on the spiritual, theological level, it also holds.
Yes, I mean, takes a long time to sort of discover these texts because they're told in koans or sort of provocative statements, wisdom statements. And I do think really that they are probably connected with Jewish mystical thought. And one major difference between the Gospels in the New Testament and those that were discovered in that find is that the ones in the New Testament suggest that Jesus of Nazareth is utterly unique in the history of the world. He is connected with the divine in a way that no one else ever has been or will be, except through him. And that kind of teaching became useful for constructing an Orthodox church that said outside the church there is no salvation. But the Gospel of Thomas suggests that Jesus spoke about being connected with the divine source, and really in terms of the Hebrew Bible, that we are all created in the image of God. And because you can't make an image of God in traditional Judaism, it's forbidden. The only image which is allowed is one that the prophets articulated in words. They talked about, for example, Ezekiel, when he talks about being carried up into heaven and seeing the Lord. What did he see? He said, I saw a throne and something like a human being, but it wasn't a human being. I saw jewels and lightning and fire and brilliant glory shining. I saw light pouring out. So light became the image you could use for the God of the Hebrew Bible. And in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus speaks of that light as the source from which the universe comes. It's a metaphor for energy, for divine energy from which the world came into being. And then Jesus says, you probably know in the Gospel of Thomas, I am the light that is before all things. I am all things. All things come forth from me. All things return to me. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up a rock, and you will find me. So it's as though this whole universe, I'm looking out at the mountains now, and the stars and the wilderness in Colorado, that all of this came forth from some source which is beyond our comprehension, but which can only be described as light, and that we came forth from that source too. And that's why we have access, a kind of light within us, as the Quakers would later say, the inner light. I think George Fox had the same kind of insight when he founded the Quaker movement,
Right.
that there was something within you or any of us that could connect you with that source.
And there's also a line I saw you reference in a lecture, something to do with, maybe it's from the same passage even in Gospel of Thomas, about Jesus saying he is the thing that existed before it existed. Does that ring a bell? It's
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's talking about the kingdom of God and saying, what is the kingdom of God that Jesus
Right.
said was coming? Well, people today will say, well, it's the end time. Or maybe it's the church, or maybe it's come or something. I mean, how do you interpret that? But the Gospel of Thomas says, don't look at the end of time and say, when will the kingdom of God come? Go back to the beginning. In fact, you have to go back before the beginning of time. And you say, well, how do you go back before the beginning? Well, any rabbi could say, well, you read Genesis, of course, and it talks about what happened before the beginning, that when God first spoke, he said, let there be light. But that is a metaphor for the divine energy that created the world, because that's before there was a world. So that's what these rabbis would have seen in the Gospel of Thomas. And Kabbalah, which you mentioned, wasn't really written down until Sephardic Jewish communities wrote certain powerful books, usually dated to the 11th to the 15th century of the Common Era. I mean, you weren't supposed to talk about mystical teaching because it could give immature people an inflated idea, well, I'm God, or some kind of foolishness. So they said, you have to just speak it to people who are mature enough to understand. But the secret gospel, like Thomas, I think, is an articulation of Jewish mystical teaching, and it claims that Jesus knew that teaching and taught it privately. Because the New Testament Gospels, as you know, are all about what Jesus taught in public, thousands of people sitting on the hillside, and he's preaching in public. But Mark says he also taught secretly to his disciples. And the Gospels in the New Testament usually don't tell you anything about secret teaching. But the Gospel of Thomas claims that in secret, Jesus of Nazareth knew about Jewish mystical teaching, which was probably thousands of years old before it was actually written in a form that we now have. And there are some professors of Kabbalah at the Hebrew University who endorse that view, because, so I began to think, maybe what they called heresy was really Jewish mystical thought very often.
Right. And I mean, you mentioned the idea of secret teachings versus the public teachings, and this seems to be something that we see in all religions, right? That there's the exoteric teachings for everyone at the congregation, and then the esoteric instructions for the initiates, the ones who are responsible enough or skilled enough to really have to go all the way, I guess, with their own personal experience. And so do you think that's the division between the orthodox mainstream view was when the exoteric public teachings became formalized, and everything esoteric and to do with kind of initiation and these private or
Yes.
secret traditions were the ones that were ostracized.
Yes, just as you say, there's not a religion we can think of. I mean, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, that doesn't have a distinct recognition of a sort of elementary basic teaching. Usually it's about behavior, it's about what you do and what you don't do. It's about halakha in Judaism, it's about Torah. And then a deeper teaching, which has to do with dimensions of experience that go beyond that. And the secret gospels, see, at first we thought in graduate school, well, there are the good gospels and the bad ones. I mean, the bishop said, these are the true gospels, 4 gospels, now they're in the New Testament. These others are garbage, so just don't read them. They're bad for you, they'll lead you astray. But now we understand that, and it took a while figuring out, because these gospels had been so denounced, denigrated, censored, that my professor said at the time, we just thought these things were weird. Well, they are kind of weird, but we finally realized that they're not meant to be replacements of the stories in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're meant to be an advanced level that can be taught subsequently. But the bishop said, no, there's only this, there's no secret teaching, stop that. Because if you're an institutional leader, you can't control what people say Jesus taught secretly. I mean, you could make up something different and contrary to Catholic teaching. And so in Orthodox Christianity, whether Catholic or Protestant, if you're going to call yourself a mystic, like Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross, you better sound a lot like Orthodoxy, because you are in danger of the Inquisition. You're in danger of being called a heretic yourself.
I mean, as someone who really believes in the importance of direct mystical experience, I'm not inclined to dismiss them as just weird, as you say, some people are. But as I was reading the Gospel of Thomas, I was definitely struck by a kind of tone of strangeness. It felt kind of just certain passages seemed kind of odd. And at first I thought, well, this was maybe something special about these Gospels. But then I was reflecting on all of the passages I'm familiar with from a Christian upbringing, and just the sacrament, the body and blood of Christ, right? If you were to hear that with fresh ears, that sounds quite odd. That's not the kind of thing you hear in everyday life, right? So part of me was like, okay, maybe they're not particularly strange. It's just I'm hearing them with fresh ears, and we've got this sanitized version of it now, where we're all used to we're told what it represents and all this other stuff. But yeah, I think when people turn to these texts, they can be surprised by some of the strangeness there.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of strangeness in Christianity. But I've been recently rereading the Gospel of Mark. It's one of my favorites. And it's the shortest and the earliest one we have, and Matthew and Luke are based on it. And it looks like a simple narrative, but it's not. In fact, there was an extraordinary British critic, Frank Kermode, who wrote a book called The Sense of a Beginning about the Gospel of Mark. And he understood this looks like a naive text, just Jesus doing miracles, and it's strange, but it's actually very subtle, and many of the miracles described are metaphors for things that are hidden in the text, and even things that Jesus probably hid himself. So there's a lot more mystery and secrecy in the text we have than we ordinarily recognize. People think, oh, this is pretty forthright, Jesus does a miracle and he's obviously God. But traditions are not that simple.
Right. And you said that Mark was the earliest, but is there, I know there's a debate about how old the Gospel of Thomas is, but is there a possibility that it's even earlier than Mark?
don't know, it's so hard to date any of these. We think not even that Mark was the earliest, because Luke said many people were writing about Jesus at the time, but it's the earliest narrative that survives, right? And it's written maybe 40 or 50 years after the death of Jesus. So when I was in graduate school, my professor thought, well, the earliest memories of Jesus wouldn't so much be stories and narrative, it would be sayings. Like Jesus said, the parable of the mustard seed, or Jesus told the story of a treasure hidden in the field. These are little, they call them pericopes, meaning a sort of a little piece of the teaching. And so to find a text that was just sayings, that's what scholars always assumed would have been the earliest, that there would be lists of the sayings of Jesus. And that's what most scholars assume were the earliest written sources. So to find a source that was nothing but sayings struck him as possibly earlier. We don't know, though, because it seems to me that we have evidence that the Gospel of Thomas is written, at least it had been written by the end of the first century, by the time, say, the Gospel of John had been written, or maybe earlier, but we don't know. Scholars who really don't like this material, and I can mention a prominent scholar at Cambridge University who has written massive commentaries on the Gospel of Thomas to prove how derivative it is and how insignificant. It's all dependent on the other Gospels. And people who say that, this is Simon Gathercole at Cambridge University, people who say that will always say, well, and also, of course, the Gospel of Thomas is written very late, because the actual texts we have that were found in Upper Egypt were written in the 3rd and 4th century. Well, totally irrelevant, because what we have, the texts, are papyrus copies in Coptic, ancient Egyptian, of what was a Greek source written far earlier, and we have pieces, fragments of the Greek source that were found in Oxyrhynchus in Upper Egypt in garbage dumps, along where you can also find fragments of the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Mark. So it looks really quite early, but we don't know the dates, and that doesn't really guarantee much anyway. But the important thing, I think, is that scholars really divide on this. Some, like me, find it say, wait, this really expands our perspective on the early Christian movement, and it explains a lot of things that we had no clue about. And others, like Gathercole, will say, oh, secondary derivative, ignore this stuff. All we really should care about is what the Orthodox Church endorses. And Orthodox, in Greek means straight thinking. So they have the straight thinking Gospels, or so they claim.
That perspective, to me, seems to place a lot of trust in the, I guess, the theological motivations of the people in power who chose the Gospels that were to become canonical. So as you have people like Emperor Constantine, I'm assuming is a relevant figure here. And in my mind, I've assumed
Yes.
as the emperor of the Roman Empire, the state religion would serve some functional purpose. They wouldn't just be choosing these things because out of some purely theological sense of what was most appropriate, but instead as having some social consequences. So yeah, if people think that they just got it 100% right and everything that's in the canon is great and everything that's not is bad, it strikes me as naive.
Well, I tend to agree with you. I mean, Constantine, I think, there's a lot of debates about his motive in becoming a Christian, or at least a patron of Christianity, since he wasn't baptized until he was nearly dying, because there wasn't a view that you could have sins forgiven after baptism. So an emperor would have to wait until he was on his deathbed so he wouldn't commit any more sins, which would be necessary for an emperor, like having people killed. But his interest was also, and his assumption is that the state endorses a religion. I mean, religion and politics are completely intertwined in the Roman Empire. They didn't even have a word to separate them. So when he became a Christian, he didn't outlaw paganism initially, but he certainly felt that it was his duty as emperor to pour money into the right churches, the Orthodox churches, which had the best networks for communication throughout an enormous empire that was beyond the capacity of any single emperor to manage. Right? There had been a tetrarchy, 4 emperors trying to control different areas of this vast territory that the Roman Empire was. But when he was the sole emperor of the whole world, and he took the Orthodox churches with their institutionalized organization patterned after the Roman army, right? So there are generals and 3 orders of authority in the army, and the Catholic Church adopted those 3 as bishops, priests, and deacons. Same structure. And then you had a very organized church. If you were the bishop, you would have, levels of priests below you who are under your authority, and below them, the ones called diaconoi, which means the helpers, the servants. So you would have an administrative bureaucracy that could amplify the necessities of the empire. You could now get money from imperial churches. You could judge cases when you don't have enough courts to deal with all the cases that need to be adjudicated. So you would become effectively part of the imperial administration in a Christian Roman Empire eventually. That was after Constantine. It took about 50, 60, 70, 80 years for that process to be completed and put into, the legal codes.
Right. And so we know that Constantine's happening around the 4th century. And I think it was in the Gnostic Gospels you wrote about the kind of the church becoming more hierarchical, as you mentioned, with the kind of bishops, priests, and deacons around 200 AD. And around the same time, I think 2 people, Irenaeus and Hippolytus, you say were writing about these heretical Gospels, which I guess suggests that they are at least older than 200 AD, right?
They certainly were. I mean, Irenaeus is writing around the year 160, and he's a Syrian missionary for Christianity, working in the very rural and barbarian land of France at the time. And he was the first to say, well, there can really be only 4 Gospels. And then he gives you this wonderful scientific explanation. He says, well, it's because there are 4 principal winds. There are 4 corners of the universe. So obviously there can only be 4 Gospels. And all the others are heresy, and you should avoid them. But Irenaeus was writing about 150 years before Constantine was converted. It was still an illegal movement. He had no military power. He had no social power to implement his convictions. It was only 200 years later when an Egyptian bishop, after Constantine was converted, he would suddenly have military force to say there are only 4 Gospels. And if you don't sign the creed that Constantine had the bishops write up by committee, the Nicene Creed, you would go into outer darkness. You'd be excluded from the emperor's court. You would be actually effectively consigned to outer darkness, excommunication. So that's an astonishing story, how institutional Christianity got formed. I think it's just, I study history because you can't make up the things that happen. You don't have to. They're astonishing enough.
Right. And it seems to me that talking about, state religion as a mode of political control, I feel like guilt and shame are incredibly powerful methods of social control. And so having a narrative around sin and repentance, original sin, you should feel bad about yourself, but then come to the authorities for repentance. That seems to fit better with the kind of, if it's an imperial mode of dominating people and keeping them under control, that narrative, I can imagine serving that function more than the Gnostic kind of, which is more empowering, right? Like discovering for yourself that you are divine. The empowering mode of that seems to fit less with those hierarchical modes of political organization.
Very much so. And that doctrine, as you probably know, I don't know if you saw the book Adam, Eve, and the Serpent.
I've not read it yet, but it's
I
on
don't
the
know if you've
bookshelf
seen
now.
that one, but well, I was looking at attitudes about sex and politics in early Christianity. Now, people didn't talk about original sin in the 2nd century. Irenaeus didn't. Other Christian leaders, Tertullian, they had a view much more consonant with Judaism, which is that if you're baptized, you can follow Christ, you can do the right thing. Original sin, I can't say that Augustine invented it, because there were hints of it before in African Christianity, before he became a bishop, in the 400s. But he created that doctrine. And I wrote about that at the chapter 5 of Adam, Eve, and the Serpent. It's about how Augustine came up with the idea that you, I, everyone, essentially is sunk deep in sin. And why? It's because Adam sinned, and that sin of Adam was kind of infected the human race with moral incapacity. I couldn't help thinking of it as a sexually transmitted moral disease, because how did humans become infected with it? He says, this is in the City of God books 9 to 11 and 12 to 14. In the City of God, he explains that Adam, we were all in Adam. Adam was a composite human. Other people hadn't thought so. They thought Adam is just a folktale example of a bad example. He chose the wrong thing. You're supposed to choose the right thing. That's what rabbis would say about that story. But he said, no, Adam was a composite person, and he contained the whole human race in himself because he procreated the human race. He's talking quite literally. He's talking biology, as if it were a biological story. So how were we in Adam? We were in the semen. Now, do you know why Jesus was the only human without sin? I mean, is that obvious?
Because he didn't have a human father.
Well, exactly. So if he wasn't conceived the way everyone else was, he was free from sin, because Augustine literally says it was transmitted through semen. And that's why the psalmist says, in sin my mother conceived me. I mean, it's astonishing how he combines a biological image with a theological concept. I was staggered. Augustine is a wild writer, but a very powerful one. And this was a very questionable issue in the 4th century. Some people say that Augustine sent 50 Numidian stallions, very prized horses, to the Bishop of Rome to urge him to vote for Augustine's view of original sin. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I've read it in various German monographs. And I asked myself, why did the church accept this really far-fetched teaching instead of the more traditional teaching which it shared with Judaism? And I think it is precisely as you said. If you were an emperor in the 4th century, you could say, well, if everyone's a Christian now, we don't need an army. We don't need police, because everyone can now be counted on to behave well once we're baptized Christians. But that's not what happened. People were still acting the same way people act, power hungry and so forth. And And so the idea of original sin, as I suddenly realized, gave you a reason why you would still need a military, you'd still need a police force, you would still need to use force and violence in the state, because humans intrinsically, because of this conception in sin, because of the infection of original sin, would always tend towards sin. So you could never give up, even if you were a Christian emperor, the power of coercion and violence and force and execution. You'd still need it. And so that became an important part of the Holy Roman Empire. It's quite a story. It's where politics and theology meet. And I was really stunned by it. So that's what I wrote the 5th chapter on. And there were some people who don't like this way of looking at it, because it suggests that the political reasons might have overtaken the theological ones. But that is very possible in this world, as you know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's extremely well put. The justification of continued domination and coercion and violence, because to me the kind of spiritual impulse is one that's very it's tied up inherently, I think, with self-improvement and being empowered and being a better person. And so I can imagine early on the Christian church being incredibly, having this really positive effect in the world. And then when it becomes a state,
Yes.
is religion, there being a significant shift. And I think you described it really, really beautifully there.
Well, I was thinking of Leon Tolstoy, of course, the great Russian writer, who, when he became a serious Christian, as he did, particularly toward the end of his life, he wrote a famous book called The Kingdom of God is Within You. And then he basically said, well, the message of Christ is the law of love. You have to give up the law of violence. Violence, coercion, execution, military power, police have nothing to do with Christianity. The state should dismantle all of those forms of coercion and recognize that the truth of Christ is about the law of love. Well, of course, that doesn't work in politics, although he did influence Mahatma Gandhi when dealing with the British Empire to try a nonviolent approach, because the Indians could not do a military approach. And this idea of nonviolence, of course, then passed on, was very influential for Martin Luther King Jr. in our country when they're dealing with institutionalized racism. Nonviolence was the means that helped crack that legal and violent code of racism. So this has been powerful in history too, but we haven't seen armies and militaries dissolve, obviously.
Right. And it occurs to me that to return to the kind of the main themes of the Gnostic teachings, we haven't really kind of defined what we mean by Gnostic. And to me, I think the etymology is the same root
Yes.
we get knowledge from, right? So it's to do with kind of insight and kind of realization through direct inner experience.
Exactly, and I'm so glad you used that word, because in Greek there are 2 words for knowing. One of them, the most familiar, is the word in Greek "idein," which means to see, to have seen. So idea literally means something you have seen, like a house, a cat, a dog, a person. That's an idea, and you connect it with the word. That's intellectual knowledge, like the knowledge of mathematics or the knowledge of geology or physiology or whatever. But this other word in Greek, gignosko, it means recognize. Like, do you know that person? Do you know yourself? I mean, when Socrates says, know thyself, it's gnothisiato, which the word we get is recognize. It's connected with gnothi. So it's insight. It's not intellectual. It's heart knowledge. And so gnosis, I mean, people say Gnosticism is all about knowing a bunch of secret passwords and crazy doctrines. At least that's what I was taught. But really, it means insight. It means knowledge of the heart. It means knowing your connection with the divine source. And that is an experiential reality, just as we started.
Right. And as you, in Gnostic Gospels, you wrote about the Gospel of Thomas, and I thought it was fascinating. You were writing about Thomas's name and how it means twin, and an interpretation that kind of evokes that idea that we have the same divinity that Saint Jesus is within us. Would you mind kind of unpacking that for the audience?
Yes, I mean, that's kind of a surprise because it says this is the gospel written by Thomas Didymus, Judas Thomas. This is a character who appears in the Gospel of John, but Thomas is Aramaic nickname for twin, and Didymus is Greek for twin. So this man's name was Judas, but they called him the twin, his nickname in the New Testament. He's not the Judas Iscariot. He's another Judas who's a follower of Jesus. They call him Thomas. And in the Gospel of Thomas, we thought, well, Thomas becomes the interrogator of Jesus who speaks with him and learns from him. And in the Gospel of Thomas, the idea isn't that Jesus had a twin brother, but that you, the disciple, are Thomas. And what you come to discover through reading the Gospel is that you and Jesus, in a way, are twins on a spiritual level, because the divine light is in him. He's illuminated. He understands his connection with the divine source and manifests it. And you, the disciple, or me, the disciple, if we were allowed to be at that point, comes to recognize that we have the same capacity. So in saying 108 in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, whoever drinks from my mouth, which is a metaphor for teaching, whoever accepts my teaching will become like me, and I will become that person, and the mysteries will be revealed to him. Now that's heresy, right? Because in the Catholic Church, for you to say, you're like Jesus, that's really blasphemy. You can't be like Jesus. He's the Son of God and you're not. That's the basic teaching, right? You need him for your salvation, otherwise you're lost. But this teaching says, no, we all come from that place through creation, and we can discover that we have that access, and then we can become like him in that sense. And so it's a very different message. No wonder the church said it was heresy.
Right, and isn't there also the Gospel of Philip? There's a quote I read in your book. I think it was something like, don't just become a Christian, but try to become a Christos.
Yes, and Christos, of course, means anointed. So it's talking about baptism. It says, okay, be baptized. And when you're baptized, we'll put oil on your head and we'll anoint you with oil. And once you're anointed, you are a Christos, because that's what the word Messiah means. It means anointed. It's just the Hebrew for the Greek word Christos. But what the Gospel of Philip, similarly, like Thomas, it says Jesus had a human father and a human mother, Joseph and Mary, just as everyone else does. But when you are baptized, as the Gospel of John says, you can become the children of God, the Father. And you can also become the children of the Divine Mother, which is the name for the Holy Spirit. So you can become not only the child of your biological parents, but also you can become the child of God and the child of the Holy Spirit through baptism. These divine names are said over you when you're baptized and anointed in the name of the Father and the Spirit and the Son. So it's about being baptized. And then you too are a Christos, anointed and the Son of God, the Son of the Holy Spirit. That again would be heresy in any Catholic teaching.
Right. I mean, I feel like it's not entirely uncommon to see people who have these experiences where they feel like they are the second coming of Jesus, and usually they're just kind of wheeled out and ridiculed on television. But I think psychologically, the thing that this points to, the recognition of this spiritual truth that can be found within all of us, and the power of Jesus as a figure. I think, I think people are tapping into a really powerful psychological process that can get derailed into mental health issues. But yeah, I think it's something very real. This idea of realizing that there's something in you that is like Jesus, or at least aspiring. You know, what would Jesus do now? Is a kind of it's treated as a kind of trivial bumper sticker, but I think it's quite a profound way to live one's life.
I think you bring up a very important issue. That's why mystical teaching is not taught to everybody. There is such a thing in Jerusalem. I don't know if you've been there, but it's called the Jerusalem syndrome. Do you know about this? The
No.
Jerusalem syndrome is when somebody arrives and says, I'm Jesus, I'm the Messiah. And this happens often enough to have people taken to mental hospitals because they think they're Jesus of Nazareth, they're Jesus Christ. And I think it happens to a lot of Americans, I've been told. So this is called the Jerusalem syndrome. It's obviously mental illness in the sense that they mean I am the one. I'm the only one.
Right.
I'm the right one. I'm Jesus. But the Gospel of Thomas doesn't teach that. It says that everyone who comes to recognize the connection with God is that. There's nothing unique about it. It's a gift, a divine gift that we all could discover, but which many of us are unaware of. So that's really quite different. And yes, it can look a lot like mental illness, but it's really it's quite different. And that's why the mystical traditions have always been quite carefully protected from people who are taking them in a naive way.
And then I guess in this picture, Jesus is more of a kind of spiritual teacher guiding us to discover our own divinity rather than a kind of a distant gatekeeper of divinity.
Yes, or the soul gatekeeper. That's not
Right.
what this is about. This is about when you discover who you really are spiritually, then that is what the kingdom of God means. That's what the Gospel of Thomas teaches. So I found this very exciting to realize that there were these teachings at the beginning of the Christian movement, and they were simply shut down. Even when I was studying at Oxford for a year from graduate school, I was very much discouraged from studying those texts by my mentor, who was a major figure in the Anglican Church, Christ Church,
Oh, well.
Christ Church College.
Oh, well. And then the phrase
just,
the king.
That's just typical.
So the phrase of the kingdom of heaven being within you, is that something from the Gnostic Gospels, or is that a bit of Gnosticism that slipped into the canonical texts?
I don't know if it's Gnosticism. It's said to be a saying of Jesus. And it is in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 17:21, and it's also in the Gospel of Thomas. So I wouldn't say it's a Gnostic teaching, but it's a teaching of Jesus that's interpreted in various ways. And you're right. And Matthew, too, at one point has Jesus say, you are the light of the world. He doesn't say, I am the light of the world. That's in John. He says, you are the light of the world. So there are those hints in the Gospels in the New Testament, but they're mostly reserved for teaching in smaller groups, which Jesus apparently did, and Paul did as well.
Right. And then we mentioned earlier this idea that these references to the idea of the kingdom of heaven, it comes at the end, but the end, I think it's the end is the beginning. There's one statement, and we spoke earlier about this idea of, the kingdom of heaven being the thing that existed before anything existed, which it very much reminds me of Taoism. I think there's this there's a kind of Zen koan that comes out of that tradition that it's I think it's what is the the face you had before you were born that I always find kind of evokes this feeling of me
Yes,
of
yes.
this, and it seems very similar to that. And also the Tao translates as the way, and you have Jesus saying, "I am the way." There's a few parallels there, it seems.
There certainly are. In fact, not only does Jesus say, I'm the way in the Gospel of John, but the Christian path was called, they called Christianity hados, which means the road, the way. This was a way before it was a set of beliefs. It was a way to live. It was a way to treat people. It was a way to experience a relationship with God and other people and the world and everything, right? Before it was a set of dogmas. And that's what I love about studying this early movement, because you see that there was a lot more diversity and range in the early Christian movement than was ever transmitted. What came down as Orthodox tradition is a sort of narrow stream, but it was a much wider movement in the beginning. And to create an Orthodox church and claim it's the only way, you have to suppress all of the other options that accompanied it much earlier.
Right. And on the kind of topic of, I guess, the mystical experience, it's often an experience of oneness or a kind of unitive experience. And there was a quote that I wrote down from the Gnostic Gospels. There was, whoever is from one will be filled with light. Whoever is divided will be filled with darkness. And I thought that was a nice kind of pointing to the fact that this oneness and this illumination, this kind of divine light, go together. I thought that was just quite a nice. You see all of these classical aspects of mysticism referenced in the Gnostic Gospels, it seems.
You do. That's exactly right. It's about probably the idea that the primordial creation is a spiritual one, as Taoism suggests.
And was there some possibility of a Buddhist influence of these Gospels? I think I read in your book about kind of trade routes to India at the time, that there may have been some connection.
That's an interesting question. It's hard to trace, because I was just teaching a course with a colleague at Winston called Jesus and Buddha, and my colleague is a specialist in 11th and 15th century Tibetan Buddhism. And, Buddhism the Buddha lived 400 years or so before Jesus. And in the first century, when Christian traditions were being written down, Buddhist traditions were being written down about the life of the Buddha. And they were well known in Egypt. And once you read the fathers of the church talking about heretics, some of them, Hippolytus of Rome, for example, in about 160, says, oh, and there are these heretics, these naked Indians sitting by the Ganges meditating. They're heretics too. So they knew about Buddhists. In fact, another Clement of Alexandria, Christian teacher in Alexandria in Egypt, 2nd century also, says, yes, and they're the Buddha, and some people thought he was a divine being. So we don't know how much of Buddhist teaching could have infiltrated, but it's interesting that the Gospel of Thomas is attributed to Thomas, whom tradition says is the disciple who went to India. And there is a church of St. Thomas in Kerala, in India, which claims to have been built on the grave of the Apostle Thomas after he went to India. So these teachings could have gone to India. And some people say, well, did Jesus go to India? I don't think it's likely for a village rabbi. But the teachings certainly could have gone and been influenced by Buddhist and Hindu teachings. And one feels that kind of influence in some of these sources. But I don't think it can be demonstrably shown, because we just don't have hard evidence of that. There are just hints about
it. Right.
At this point, maybe there'll be another discovery.
Yeah. And on the point of the kind of unitive worldview, reading around this, people seem to routinely say that the Gnostic perspective is quite dualistic. There's quite a split between the spirit and the body. The body is seen as something kind of to be negated and the material world as a kind of negative thing. Is that right?
Well, the thing is, there's no single kind of Gnostic view. I mean, all of these texts got lumped together because they were found together and they were all agreed to be sort of heresy from the church's point of view. But there are different sources. Some of them do talk about a radical split between the spirit and flesh. And that's very much part of ancient tradition. It comes out of Platonism. So some of these texts sound that way. The ones that I like best, though, James, are the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the round dance of the cross, come from a tradition from the teacher called Valentinus. And that is extremely monistic. There's no idea of dualism at all. In fact, I was just talking to someone whose background is Hindu, who was brought up Roman Catholic. And I said, this sounds Indian to me. And she said, what do you mean Indian? And I said, there's no separation between the material and the spiritual, that these are part of the same reality. Like when Jesus says, I am the light, and split a piece of wood and I am there, lift up a rock and you will find me. That is, the material and the spiritual are understood as part of the same reality. And that's very different. So I would say some sources are dualistic. The ones I find most interesting come from a tradition that is distinctly monistic.
Right. I mean, we mentioned that you think there could be an influence of Jewish mysticism here and potentially even Buddhism. And you just mentioned ancient Greek thinking. Is that a possibility as well, that kind of ancient Greek religious traditions also had an influence?
Oh, yes. People do notice that in some of the texts, not the ones I've been talking about, it looks like there's Platonic influence, and Manichaean Christianity did talk about an extreme dualism between the material and spiritual worlds, and Marcionite Christianity, which was an early Christian heresy, split those entirely. Said God could not have created the material world, somebody else did, is a lesser being. And that kind of negative teaching was actually projected by some of the fathers of the church onto all of these secret teachings. So they ignored the ones that were monistic to sort of, it's like saying in our country that if you're a Republican, that Democrats are basically communists, or saying the same thing about Republicans. You just sort of tar them with the same brush and people will think they're that bad.
Oh, that's really interesting because I got that impression as I was reading around this. So I read several places where it kind of just asserted that the Gnostic perspective is one of, so I think it was that you have the monad, which is the kind of the unitive source, mystical kind of energy, divine energy of the universe that you might call God. And then that splits off into beings called aeons, one of which I think it was called a demiurge, which is the God of the Old Testament, but that was a negative figure who had imprisoned our perfect spirits in a kind of, the material world's this prison. And I mean, having raised Christian, it seems it's very radical to be given this perspective in which the creator God is actually the kind of the villain of the story. But that's interesting to know that there are different schools, that they didn't all have the same perspective.
That is the heresy of a teacher called Marcion, who was a teacher in the 2nd century, roundly denounced by Christians who had a much more benign view of the God of Israel. But it was branded as a heresy of Marcion, and then it was taken up later by the prophet Mani, who was a Christian, but he saw Christianity in those starkly negative terms, so that essentially sexuality was prohibited to those who would be perfect. Eating any kind of food, any kind of alcohol that was not strictly vegetarian was also seen as demeaning. And you were supposed to purify, become as ethereal as you possibly could in this world. And that is a strain of Christianity that is really a minor strain, but some people identified it with what they called Gnosticism before we found these texts. If you read the book called The Gnostic Religion by Hans Jonas, I don't know if you've seen it. It's a very influential book. It's a beautifully written book. He was a German Jewish scholar who studied New Testament in Germany before the war and published that book in 1934 called Gnosis und Spätantiker Geist. And he saw it as this kind of dualism. But that view of so-called Gnosticism changed when we found an actual library, which gives us a much more complex picture.
Right. I mean, that image where there's more than one deity, it makes me think of as an adult when I read Genesis for the first time, I was struck by in the translations I found there were phrases about things like, I think it was "Let us make mankind in our image" instead of in my image, and I wasn't sure if that was the kind of the royal we almost as a way of speaking, or if there's like a yeah, I've just never heard it mentioned actually. This isn't necessarily about Gnosticism, but since we were mentioning these alternate theological views of deities, is there a standard interpretation of why that there seems to be reference to other deities there?
Yes, it is a plural in Hebrew. And interestingly, in the first chapter of Genesis, the name of God, Elohim, in Hebrew, is a plural. El is the name of God, right? Elohim is plural, the gods. If you're reading Hebrew, you could say the gods, but essentially, whatever Hebrew-speaking people wrote that story down, scribes, probably in the court of King David, said, you talk about the gods. Well, the gods are our God. And that God can speak in plural because it is the royal we. Later Jewish, and if you look at Midrash, Jewish interpretation of that plural in Genesis, there's a lot of debate. Some people say, well, he meant the angels who were working with him. He meant the heavenly court who created the angels. And that's sort of based on Plato's Timaeus, where the higher God has lower figures, a demiurgos, demiurge, that's where they get it from Plato, Timaeus, creating the physical bodies. And then Christians, of course, later said the we, who are the we? Well, he's speaking to the Logos, to Christ, the pre-existent Christ. That's what the Gospel of John suggests, that the Logos was, Jesus was primordial. So Father is speaking to the Son. It's been a puzzle for translators ever since.
Right. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Is there any way you would send people to if they want to look into your work more? Is there a website or anything?
I don't usually have much of a website, but all of the books are online, and it's been so fascinating to study this. I wrote the Gnostic Gospels when I just was in graduate school, and then about 20 years later, wrote a book called what's it called? Beyond Belief: The Secret Gospel of Thomas. I don't know if you've seen that one,
Yeah,
but it's when I realized I didn't care much what I believed. I got to know that text much better. And the one about the invention of original sin was also written later, Adam, Eve, and the Serpent, but just chapter 5 is about original sin. If you're interested in that, I suggest that. And then I wrote a book on the origin of Satan, which totally shocked me because I wasn't looking for it. It turned out that the origin of Satan had to do with the origin of Christian anti-Semitism, which I didn't want to find out, and I wasn't aware was kind of embedded in the gospel stories. So it's an exploration of these traditions and both their liabilities and their gifts.
that's great. I definitely encourage everyone to check them out. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Very good talking with you.
Wow, well, that was very, very, very cool. I love that. I love that. Okay. Why is this thing in my face? Get out of my face. Thank you very much. So that's pretty much puts the end to the divinity or the veracity of the Gospels, which pretty much puts the end to puts the kibosh, puts bye bye, says bye bye Christianity, because you don't exist any. What the hell am I doing? I'm trying to hold on. I'm trying to adjust my toupee. All right. I think I got it. I got it under control. So, what do you think? That's it? Christianity kaput? No reason, no rationale, no evidence. In fact, less evidence in 2021 than there was in 800. Time of Charlemagne. Charlemagne was a Christian. He butchered a lot of people, didn't he? Do you like guys like history? Do you like real history? Verified history? I do. Just to let you know. Okay. What can I do to entice anybody into the room? Pretty much nothing, I guess, eh? All right. Then I'll try something else. Tell you what I'll do. Tell you what I'll do. Yes, this is what I'm going to do. I am going to throw up my axioms, and then I'm going to ask everybody who agrees with me to join in the Google Meet. And I will put the information for that as soon as I find, there it is. Nope, that's not it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Bear with me, please. I don't know how good this looks, but yeah. All right, I'm gonna show you this one. There you go. There's me axioms. All gods are imaginary. Tick. Human evolution is proven science. Tick. What's the next one? The 11 Satanic Rules of the Earth debunk the 10 Commandments of Christianity. Tick. Oh, we can even check. Look what popped up. The good Satan, his rules, and the evil Christian God, his rules. So let me try and make sense of something here. Ah, there we go. There we go. Okay. So here's the challenge to you Christians. I'll challenge anyone to come in and we'll go head to head. Okay? A Christian will read his 10 commandments from his evil God, and I will read the 11 Satanic Rules of the Earth from good Satan. And we'll go head to head, side to side, and we'll compare whose makes more sense, whose will prevent more violence, and whose is in any way is in any way ambiguous. So I invite anyone to come on in and take me up on it. Anyone. Okay, the way to do it is to enter. I guess I should put up a code there and everything, eh? I do have it up there. Just let's see. Yeah. So here you go. You want to join? Open up your Google Meet application, and the code is ZYQP0. No, I'm going to start again with that damn code. Open up your Google Meet application and type in this code, ZYQPOVSVOP, or click and paste it from the description below. If nobody accepts my invitation to go head to head, then that's okay, because next time I come online, I'm going to present the same challenge again. It's like going fishing. There's enough people watching it. If you do it enough times, somebody will say, hey, I want to challenge you on that, Sidney Winston. How can you possibly say that the 10 Commandments of the all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful Yahweh, how can you say that there's any merit in claiming that the 11 satanic rules of the earth are in any way comparable to the commandments of Yahweh? Well, I'll take you up on that. Come on then, let's have a chat about it. Get it. And while we're waiting for you to join in, let's see what who we got here.
All right, hello YouTube. I've got a list here, and I'm going to read through the top 10 lies that Christians tell. Now, first, I should probably mention this more applies to fundamentalist Christians than it would most mainstream Christians. Unfortunately, I live in America, so for us, mainstream and fundamentalist are basically the same thing. 33% of the Christians in this country identify as evangelicals, and many more are more fundamentalists, certainly, than what a European would consider a mainstream Christian. So let's get started. Number 10, there is a lack of evidence for evolution. Actually, if you look, you can find plenty of evidence for evolution. You can look at the fossil record. You can look at genetics. You can even look at archaeology to some extent, because even the human race has been changing throughout the time that it has existed in the archaeological record. And if you looked at common sense, I hate to mention it because Christians often lack it, you would note that small changes over time would necessarily lead up to larger changes, and certainly if you can micro-evolve, which most Christians even will admit can happen, over a long period of time, that could lead to macroevolution. But Christians ignore these things and a multiplicity of other evidence in favor of the Bible. Number 9, the Bible is a reliable historical guide. False. If you look at the stories in the Bible, you will find very little archaeological evidence that any of them actually occurred. There is dispute as to the things which happened in the Old Testament, and there's certainly a lack of evidence for the New Testament. That's because the New Testament was not written contemporary to the events which actually occurred. It was written at a later date by people who never actually took part in those events, the Gospels being written far later than Jesus' supposed lifetime. For instance, and for an example for the Old Testament, look at the book of Exodus. There's absolutely no archaeological evidence that there was ever a crossing over the Red Sea. There's absolutely no archaeological evidence in Egypt that the Hebrews were ever slaves there. This doesn't get mentioned by Christians. They mention all this supposed archaeological evidence without actually having any. And it just spreads word of mouth. Oh, of course there's evidence. It's in the Bible. It must have happened. But actually there is none. Number 8. Charles Darwin converted to Christianity before death. Also false. We have documentation by his child that the supposed incident, which has to do with a particular Christian woman who supposedly visited him around the time of his death, the reported event that she converted him to Christianity and that he repented of evolution altogether. But actually, this person was reportedly never alone with Darwin to begin with, and that right up until his death, he was coherent enough to continue talking about his scientific principles. Now, not that this would really matter, because Charles Darwin is just one person, and his religious background would have very little, I hope, to do with his scientific findings. But Christians try to cast doubt on evolution by saying Darwin recanted on his deathbed, and he actually didn't. Number 7, Noah's Ark has been found on Mount Ararat. This is a recent lie that has been spread. Dozens and dozens of expeditionary groups, usually funded by various churches and Christian universities, have gone up on Mount Ararat and claimed to find the Ark that Noah sailed. They've taken all sorts of wood samples off the mountain, and every last one of them, there is one common theme. They never allow a legitimate scientific institution to study their findings. They also never identify where they located it. Satellite imagery has shown nothing. The so-called boat-shaped indentation on the top of Mount Ararat is just that, an indentation. It's a canyon. It just happens to be shaped like we would say a boat would be shaped. And the story of Noah's Ark really doesn't make a whole lot of sense anyway, because we know from geologic evidence the Earth has never had a 40-day, 40-night-long flood. Despite what a handful of pseudoscientists have claimed, there's no reliable evidence that there was ever a deluge in that region of the world. That water never came up out of the Mediterranean and rained down out of a huge blow spout. That never happened. There's absolutely no geologic evidence of it whatsoever. All this pseudoscience crap is just that, pseudoscience. So no, they have never actually found any reliable remains of wood or boats or human fossils or anything up on Mount Ararat. What they did find was a cabin that appears to have been used by people who were nomadic and traveling over the mountain range seasonally. Number 6, the Isa stones prove humans and dinosaurs coexisted. It's ICA, Isa stones. I think that's how it's pronounced. If you look this up, however, unmedicated individuals will notice that depictions in medieval folklore in particular tend to exaggerate the size and physical features of creepy crawly animals. Snakes become a garden snake of 2 feet that some farmer killed. I once saw a story on it from an English, I believe it was an English news printing from the 1600s, and it depicted a snake, and the snake was gigantic. It looked 20 or 30 feet long, and it was really just a story about a dude killing a common adder, which was probably 3 or 4 feet long. And it had a coxcomb and a huge tongue and fire coming out of its mouth. So to say that a bunch of ancient stones of dubious date and dubious construction prove that humans and dinosaurs coexisted because it appears to depict a stegosaurus and a pteranodon doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you look at creatures that exist now that look kind of like that anyway, like regular old lizards and cranes, and then you get people who, until very recently, were very unscientific in drawing things. So, doesn't hold water. Number 5, the sounds of hell. This is from the Art Bell show. You see, he claims that a caller sent him an audio clip of what happened up in Siberia. They were supposedly, according to the story, drilling down miles below the crust, and they found a pocket of hot air or something and lowered a microphone in, and they recorded a bunch of people screaming. Well, number 1, this event never actually occurred. It was a hoax drawn up by a Norwegian fundamentalist group. And then the clip, which you have probably heard if you've looked this up before, is actually a studio recording from a movie that was used as a prop during a segment about the Sounds of Hell story, which had been adapted from that Norwegian fundamentalist paper to an American broadcast on Trinity Broadcast Networks. So the actual recording you've heard is just a movie prop, and the story never actually happened in the first place. So this is debunked. It's officially debunked. Go on Snopes and look it up. Number 4, many scientists are converting to Christianity. I'm sure there are scientists converting to Christianity. I'm also sure there are scientists converting to Islam and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism, atheism, Satanism, paganism, Wicca, etc., etc. People convert to different religions. There is no solid empirical data that shows us that, yes, science is growing closer to Christianity. Actually, evidence shows us that as people go up the educational scale and get a higher and higher education, they tend to be more agnostic and atheist. Atheism and agnosticism makes up the majority of the PhD population. It doesn't make up nearly the majority of the mainstream population in the Western world. Generally speaking, the more intelligent a person is, the more correlated they are to not believing in organized religion. There are plenty of deists and there are plenty of agnostics, but as for fundamentalist organized religion members, not very many. So actually, this is also false. Number 3, the existence of Jesus is indisputable. Also false. There is dispute over whether Jesus actually existed in the first place. We get this dispute from the fact that the earliest books which mention Jesus are from up to 50 or 60 years after he supposedly died. Now, I would think that if a person was walking on water and rising from the dead and raising other people from the dead and doing all of these wonderful things Jesus supposedly did, that somebody during his lifetime would have written something about him that would have been preserved. If not in folklore in the regional area, then even in the world at large. Somebody that interesting would have spread far beyond the walls of Judea into the Mediterranean basin at large within several years. It wouldn't have taken decades for him to be written about by anybody. There were historians in that region during the supposed time of his life which failed to write about his existence. Why is that? If he was doing these miracles and he was being spread wide and far in that region, somebody would have written about him during his lifetime. Why didn't the Roman historians do that? It's because there is a very real possibility that what we consider Jesus is a conglomerated fable derived from a teacher of Judaism, who would be the actual person Jesus, mixed with all sorts of tales spun about him by other people after he already died. He may not have even been crucified. There is no historical virtue to a very large part of the Jesus story, especially when you ignore some of the books that were originally in Christianity that weren't included in the KJV canon. Number 2, the present KJV is an accurate representation of an inclusive Christian canon. Again, there are dozens and dozens of books that were near and dear to early Christians, along with the books that we have in the Bible now, that were not included in the King James Version of the Bible and aren't included in many versions of the Bible. Things like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, the Book of Enoch. All of these different books were left out of the Bible canon, and they were chosen to do so at the Council of Nicaea, which was a Catholic thing. And the reason why a lot of these seem to have been left out is, number 1, a lot of them depict Jesus as less than a perfect person, and more as a teacher or philosopher than as a god. And modern Christians say, well, then of course you shouldn't include that in the Bible, because they've been tainted by the fact that thosbooks weren't included in the first place, so their upbringing was to believe that Jesus is a messianic figure, when in reality, theologians the world over are starting to realize, actually, if you look at the books and you reevaluate them for which ones really honestly seem legitimate, it seems he wasn't really meant to be a messianic figure. And a lot of the books were left out because they depict females in a better light than the church did. They empowered females, and that wasn't okay during those times. There were books that were left out because they were too confrontational towards authority figures, which makes sense because if you look at the life and history of Jesus as reported in the present Bible, you get the sense that he really didn't like society very much. You get the sense he really didn't like authority, that whoever this person is, whether he was a teacher or a messiah or whatever, really didn't like authority figures in the ancient world very much and was very skeptical of organized religion. You don't get that sense as much as you would if the books that were left out were included, and they were left out for that reason. And the number one lie told by and to Christians. The book of Revelation refers to the end of the world at some future date. This is probably the biggest lie in Christianity. The reason this is a lie is simple. If you look at it from a theological perspective, it's purely wrong. The book of Revelation was written symbolically to represent ancient Rome and Nero Caesar, whose name just coincidentally happens to add to 666. If you read the book in the context of the time in which it was written, which was during the reign of the tyrannical emperors of Rome, who put down the Christian and Jewish populaces immensely, and you look at it and you compare it to those times, you see dozens and dozens of parallels between what was happening historically during that period and what was written in Revelation. It was not written to represent the end of the world at all, and I would point out to you Christians, if you look in the Bible and you look at what Jesus said, he told you, according to the books that are already in there, that the world would pass away before the present generation was done. So why didn't the end of the world come during the generation of Jesus? Maybe he wasn't talking about the end of the world and he was talking metaphorically. But Christians like to cherry pick and they like to point out that, oh, the Bible isn't metaphorical, except for the parts I don't like. Those are metaphors. Everything else is the grace of God shining down from heaven to everybody. And that's a problem because it doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. So those are the top 10 lies of Christianity. Not all Christians tell them, not all Christians believe in them, but it is a facet of mainstream Christianity and to a much greater degree, fundamentalist Christianity. So arm yourselves against lies, know the truth. You can look any of these up online and you'll find plenty of evidence. You'll find the fact that there are no pyramids mentioning the internment of the Jews during the Exodus period. You'll find the Isa stones are nothing but an ill-begotten hoax. And you'll find Revelation is agreed by 99% of theologians to be representative of ancient.
Wow, that ended abruptly. But there you go. Another refutation, 10 refutations of Christianity. Please, a reminder that the join room is open. The Google Meet application. Open it and enter the code on your screen. Or go down to the description and enter the code there. Okay, I'm going to change to this screen now, just because I can. And we just listened and watched, what, almost 2 hours worth of proof that Christianity is mythology and debunking all the claims that Christianity makes from top to bottom, from tip to toe, top to toe. There is, they just, there's nothing they can do. They cannot escape the fact that that Christianity makes no sense and it's pretty much contrived. There's nothing non-contrived about it. Nothing at all. Zero. Now look, there's 4 people watching. Can somebody give me an indication of whether any of you are going to join or not? Because if you're not going to join, then I'm just going to go and have an intermission and wait for someone to join. I'll give it a few minutes, maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. If people start to join the meet room, then great. We will have a discussion, or we'll see what emerges. If not, I'll have to take it from there when we come back. So intermission time, ladies and gentlemen. Please join if you want, if you can, if you think you can contribute to anything at all. If you're an atheist, this is Ask an Atheist. Wonder why I didn't put that up there. Ask an Atheist. Let me just throw it in there because it's called Ask an Atheist Anything. Yes, that's what I called it. Ask an Atheist anything. Anything at all. Crap, I'm in the wrong room. Look at that, look. Ask an Atheist anything, and there's the meet room. So I'm going to take a break here, and we'll be back.
Young women.
Yeah, but how are you going to find a Muslim man to marry you when you're 27?
Who says I want a Muslim man?
Are you ever going to get married?
You're trying to fit me in your little box.
Are you always going to be a virgin?
And it's not working. You're trying to fit me in your little box. Are you always going to be a dumb bitch?
You fat roast beef cunt.
Ugly ass Biggie.
I look better than you, bitch. Open your can.
No, you don't.
Open your can, bitch.
No. Why
Fat
should I?
bitch.
Ugly cunt.
I'm hot, bitch.
You're not. You're definitely
Look
not
at
hot.
you.
Yeah, look at me. Everybody can see that I'm
What girl
beautiful.
on Hangouts looks better than me?
Me? I do.
Nobody thinks you look better than me, fat ass.
I think I look better than you. That's the most important thing.
I don't think you really believe that. I think you're lying.
No, I really believe that.
No, you don't.
You have a piggy nose. You need to. You need to have
You don't
nose
believe that.
job.
You are a fucking pig.
No, you're the pig. You have a fucking profile picture of a pig that actually looks like you.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Explain that. Explain that.
The purple unicorn?
It is a pink, piggish, whatever it is. It looks like you. Like, is it your twin? Is it your profile pic? What is it?
I don't know what avatar you're talking about. I don't care.
You don't care? Why do you put it on then if you don't care?
How often do you go to mosque?
How often do you masturbate?
About once a month. Why?
Why do you ask if I go to the mosque?
I'm just curious.
Well, I was just curious
know what
as
you're
well.
up to on the internet?
Why do you masturbate if you have a boyfriend? Doesn't he satisfy you?
Because I'm very sexual.
Does he know about that?
That's fucking once a month isn't that often. Yeah. Sometimes
Are you a nymph? Are you a nymph?
No, but I'm close to it.
And you're proud of that? So you're actually not
a virgin? You're a virgin? Yeah. Sex is awesome.
So
you're missing out. Unless you're lying about being a virgin.
You're not a monogamous. Are you monogamous or are you cheating on your boyfriend?
We're monogamous.
I doubt it. If you have the sex drive all the time, I doubt it. You're actually loyal to him. You look like the type of woman that will cheat on her boyfriend.
You're just jealous that you don't have a boyfriend. You're trying to show your pussy.
No, I just
am.
Once you have seen the one type like you, it's like you know them all, you know?
Your parents should know what you're up to on the internet.
Why should they know? Like, why?
They wouldn't let you, because they wouldn't allow you on the internet anymore. They ground you. They take your internet away. If they found out.
I pay my own internet, hon. They don't do shit.
You have a job? You're allowed to leave the house for a job?
You know what? I like to milk the system. I want the government to pay my bills. I don't want to work.
That's what I do.
Well, then we have something in common. Finally, some common ground. Damn.
He talked to you on the phone and said that you knew about terrorist attacks that were going to happen.
So you claim that I know what's happening in the future? Like I can predict what's going to happen?
Like you know about the terrorists that commit them.
Allahu Akbar. What is going on here? I heard something's being mentioned.
The usual.
She said she was going to behead me too.
You know what? I don't have issues with you, godless Kafir, but now I know you milk the system like me. Yeah, I think we could be friends, actually. How about that? Think about it. Let it marinate in your mind a little bit.
Do you actually think Sia knows about terrorist attacks?
No.
I was going to say. Oh, damn it. Why couldn't you be a Fruit Loop and have a conspiracy? say you stop talking. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm off keyboard. I'll be back in a bit.
Quick.
On a channel, so it's like fucking 40 people all talking over each other. It's ghetto.
But here's the thing. You can have fucking 25 people. Hey, it's bad enough when 10 people are in a fucking chat room. Don't worry about 25.
I don't know. I like how the text chat is though. Like the text chat is right on the same screen as the voice chat. Like I hate having on Hangouts switching over to the external chat.
See, here's another thing. What someone told me, but I don't know if they've implemented it yet. They're gonna do on Discord. They're gonna do like like face to face. A video camera. And I thought, well, that's not going to work because if it's a gaming channel, because that's where fucking gamers go to fucking play their games and they can talk to each other and yada yada yada. How can you fucking have a fucking face to face and then play the game at the same time? It's just not going to work.
Right. I don't know. They could have the person on camera pop up in a little corner or something. I don't know. I don't know what they're gonna
do. You mean they haven't implemented the video yet in Discord?
No, I think you can video chat with somebody on one in private, but that's it.
Jeez, because I heard about it weeks and weeks and weeks ago, the announcement.
And I hate on Discord when you get banned, you're IP banned.
No, I'm not banned. I just stopped using Discord and just stuck to Hangouts. I haven't been on Discord in a long time, months.
I think it's a rebellion. That's what it is. Like people going, fucking, Hangouts, it's Google. People like Google, so they go to fucking Discord, and it's basically a fucking chat room with no icons, or there is little icons in there, whatever. After a while, people are they're gonna come back here.
Yeah, I think part of the problem might have been that the sniping, so people couldn't deal with it anymore, so they went to Discord.
I left Discord because I was server muted all the time. Fuck it, what's the point?
That makes you cool.
Well, you couldn't say anything.
Oh. Are Hangouts still snipeable?
Not this one.
Yeah.
But people have a way of making them unsnipeable.
Now, but I can come back in my unsnipe.
What guy?
The guy who was in here, the black guy.
He's from Down's old Stickcam and whatever.
Oh, really?
That group, yeah. He's like he's Down, Christian Hillbilly, this dude. They're all from the same old school.
Well, if that's the case, how come it's taking him so long to get on here?
That's what he asked. It's exactly the same question he asked when he got in here. How come it took so long to find you? Fuck, I can't remember what he called.
Well, it won't work with Sidney or any males. You know, it'll only work with a woman. But
I identify as a female, though. I identify as a female, so it might work with me.
Nah,
I live in
you
Canada.
might identify as a female, but you don't have the voice to go with it.
Well, it doesn't matter. I live in Canada, and apparently we now have the right to feelings. And if I identify as a female, you have to use the correct pronoun. Otherwise, I can have feelings.
Yeah, but you might identify as it, but you don't have the looks and the talent.
No, but you have to respect my gender identity.
I am respecting it. That's why.
Yeah, but you don't want to bring me to tears now, do you?
Why aren't people joining the room? I thought about that a long time ago, and I thought, that way, you can't block your own fucking. Well, no, you can block your own.
That's something you need to know the right terminology, though. Like you said, it meets.
The old guy that.
No, the last time it worked, the last time you called, the number that came up on the cell phone there was no call on the cell phone. It was the landline that rang, was the landline number that was calling.
I know, but that's what I don't get. That's the fucking part that I don't fucking get.
So you got to somehow divert the call from calling itself to calling the cell phone.
I know, but that's probably where the breakdown is. That's probably what I'm thinking.
That's probably
I thought about that a long time ago, and I thought, that way, you can't block your own fucking. Well, no, you can block your own number from your cell phone.
Yeah,
block your
first
fucking number from the landline.
First, you got to call the cell phone so it knows it's blocking the number.
Sidney, you know what I'm going to do?
I have no idea.
Right? I'll tell you what I'm going to do, right? Because I sort of.
All right, tell me.
I know what you're saying, but because I've had so many fucking beers, well, I'm going to continue this tomorrow.
All right.
Because now I'm getting.
Was it you had me call? I had the caller ID. I could change the number, and you had their house. It was some guy from Hangouts. You had their house phone and their cell phone number, so I made their house phone call them. Then he blocked his own house phone number.
Yeah.
The old guy that lives with his dad, his sick dad.
Well, fuck, your girlfriend's back. Fucking hell. Because I've been drinking.
I don't have a girlfriend, sorry.
Ah, shut the fuck up.
What? You mentioned me. What the fuck?
You came back. What'd you come back for?
To talk.
Who to?
To you.
What about?
About whatever you want to talk about.
Well, well, let's talk about how fucking the Muslims are fucking stupid. How's that?
Sure. Prove me that Muslims are stupid.
Oh, well, they walk around a fucking square box, right, round and round and round, kissing a fucking stone, which is not even it's not a stone, it's a fucking meteorite, and they're all kissing it. That's fucking stupid.
Do you want to know? Do you want to know the background of it so I can educate you?
Oh yeah, I do. I know the background of it. It's a fucking meteorite, right? And we all know it's a fucking meteorite. And they saw this fucking black stone and amongst white fucking stone. And they went, oh gee, look at that! There's a fucking black stone amongst fucking white stones. So they put it in a fucking. And they went, oh, that's got to be a message from fucking God, which it's not. It's a fucking meteorite because they find meteorites all over the fucking world, by the way. But the stupid Muzzies go, oh, that's got to be a message from fucking God. And they all walk around a fucking square fucking block.
So a bunch of Muslims rotating around a, like you said, a meteorite makes them stupid? Is that all you got?
We all fucking know, because we've had secret operatives walk in there with magnets and go, yeah, it's a fucking meteorite, it's magnetic. So how do you feel about that?
Is that all you got? Is that the only reason why Muslims are stupid? That's the only thing you got?
Yeah. Oh, no, there's lots of other reasons, but they make up fucking their own fucking reasons why they're stupid. And we all know that it's a meteorite, right? And meteorites, there's millions and millions of meteorites all around the fucking world, and yet they found this fucking particular meteorite, and they went, oh, well, this one's fucking special.
You know that Muslims actually worship Allah and not that black box, like you said. You know that they actually worship Allah.
Well, why are they walking around a fucking black box, which is a stone, well, not stone, a brick fucking thing with a
okay, let me educate you. If you let me explain to you, I'll educate you. I'll educate you. Do you want to know?
How does a square fucking box? How does a square fucking box represent fucking Allah?
I'll educate you.
Walking around the outside of a fucking meteorite of all fucking things. How fucking dumb can you get? That's like fucking everybody circling.
Hello, skeptic. How are you?
Hey.
Hey.
I'm okay. We're using that video for clickbait.
What video? What are you talking about?
Streaming.
For clickbait? Well, no, it's nostalgia for me.
Yeah, I get you.
Did it work though? The clickbait? Did it work?
I'm here, ain't I?
There you go. So it works on one person on the universe. Oof. I'm shocked.
Yeah, well, I listened a minute and I figured out what it was.
Yeah. But this was before your time.
Man.
Before your time, dude.
Okay.
But in that hangout was Godless Girl, Sia, Sasha, and me. And you'll notice how Sia's she's an excellent person.
I think I invited Sia in your hangout.
And Bulldog is a uncouth.
I think I invited Sia in your hangout.
What do you mean you invited Sia in my hangout?
I think I did. Because she and I was in a hangout with a bunch of other people, and I found your link on YouTube and came in, and I dropped your link in the hangout with Sia and a bunch of other people. Dan.
How long ago was that?
About 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. Because I met I knew Godless. I'd met her before.
Mm-hmm.
But I met Sasha in your hangout with you.
Right. Well, it doesn't look like you're in this one yet. There's an hour to go, but you haven't.
I may not be. I'm probably not.
This is from. This is from. This is from 4 years ago.
Yeah, I could have been it.
How long have you been around with us?
About that long, I guess.
So you came in on the tail end of this, I guess.
What, that video particularly? I don't know. I really don't know.
This literally, it was literally about 4 years ago. Very close to 4 years ago.
It's somewhere around that time. It had to be because of the link was sealed.
Well,
Time flies, man. It's crazy.
do you think time for us when you say time flies, do you mean it in a relative sense or do you mean it in a literal sense?
A relative, I guess. Time doesn't move any faster in a literal sense. Just perception of it.
But it's still flying in a literal sense, isn't it? It's still going, second by second.
Yeah, it's getting on. It's going by quickly.
And the seconds keep exact precision, like a metronome. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah. Yes, it's.
Actually, they don't. I
Yeah.
believe that there's a clock that's continuously upgraded, or is an atomic clock. I'm sorry, that keeps the right time, and all other clocks are calibrated to that one. Is what my understanding is.
I guess different places in the universe it expands and contracts. Maybe I don't know.
Not my field. Sorry, don't know it.
I'm not
Nah.
I've heard them talk about time expansion and shit like that and contraction. And I know mine hadn't expanded and contracted only my perception of it.
Yeah.
You know, if I was miserable and wanted relief from something, it always seemed to expand and get longer.
Yeah.
Especially if that ticking clock was in sight.
Anything new in the science world that I missed?
Getting ready to fly that rocket, that Starship. That's about all I know.
They flew it? They're gonna fly it? What?
No, not yet. They're getting ready to. Did you watch? I posted the video.
No, I really wasn't mentioning about the Starship so much. I was more into anything cosmological.
Oh no, I don't.
Nothing.
I haven't heard anything.
I've got a video lined up. About neutrinos. It's actually not just a video lined up. It's YouTube. I'm wondering whether to play it and share it with everybody when I actually watch it.
Not good.
I don't know if I'm going to do it tonight.
Oh no, I'm about to go to sleep. I just happened to be I was adding some tags. They had a protest today in Pittsburgh, and I uploaded it on my YouTube channel.
Protest in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, at the college.
What was the protest against?
Circumcision.
The protest in Pittsburgh against circumcision? Excellent.
Yeah, at the college.
Were there riot police and water cannons and stuff?
No, I said it wasn't BLM, man.
So how protesty was it?
Polite, the protesters.
Like the way Christian Hillbilly and Mr. Batman protests and preaches?
They don't protest, man. They
You mean that nobody called the police?
No.
That's incredible. Every time Mr. Batman preaches, somebody calls the police.
They called the police in Mobile, and the police made them leave. But that was when I became aware of them. When they did that,
okay.
And it pissed me off that they shut them down. Their freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
If they ever come back, I'm going to get a permit and make sure that all the legal hurdles are out of the way.
Yeah.
Because Alabama is the only fucking place in the country where they've done this shit. Shut them down.
How is it possible that in Alabama, where they're making spaceships, they're cracking down on anti-Christian protests?
It's old-fashioned, man. Cultures doesn't move as fast.
But who are the people? I mean, there's got to be scientists living in Alabama working on the spaceships who who have no truck with anything mythical, but there's people turning up to promote mythicism over science.
Oh, yeah, I don't see much of that. I've seen a couple preachers in a parking lot, but I probably haven't seen that. They'll come out, like going downtown. They're not standing on the street yelling, or I mean, that's very rare.
You mean
Once in a
Christian
while,
hillbillies like an anomaly in the United States in the preacher community?
yeah, he really is.
So he's another performance artist.
Yeah, he's a buffoon, man.
Yeah. So we've established tonight, at least I think we've established tonight, that number one, Darth Dawkins himself is a performance artist, and number two, that Mr. Batman is a performance artist. So that's two performance artist Christians.
All right. None of the antagonists, just about I know, most of them are all atheists.
Well, of course.
I've met a couple women in Texas.
They have to be atheists
that
because
were
if
religious.
they're bought into the Bible, then circumcision is I got it. So somebody
Yeah, I mean,
somebody made up a story that if you don't get circumcised, God is going to punish you, so you better get circumcised. And people bought it. It almost seems to me that people bought into the circumcision story the same way that the Mormons bought into Joseph Smith. Cut your penis off. Cut the tip of your penis off. Yeah, okay, yeah, it makes sense. I got these plates which are translated in a hat, and here's a Bible. Here is a divine revelation that God has given me to present to you. Oh yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Really, the way it happened was there was a Dr. Sayer with the American Medical Association in New York City Hospital.
What was his position there?
Yeah, he was physician there, and he was a Presbyterian, and he had a kid that come in with some kind of neurological disease. I forgot what it was, the specific.
Yeah.
But he just for somehow made some leaps in his mind, and he knew that Jews practice circumcision, and he thought that I don't know if the kid was having some kind of problem, but anyway, he circumcised him. So he looked for the Jews for the technology, the idea how to do it.
He was a doctor. Hold on, he was a doctor.
Yeah, Dr. Sayer in New York.
And he didn't know how to do a circumcision.
No, they didn't do them. It was a new thing.
Yeah, but I mean, as a doctor, he couldn't figure it out medically on his own. He had to go and ask a mythicist.
No, they got it from books. I don't know how he learned, man. But I'm telling you a rough outline of how it went down,
okay.
And it really didn't catch on. And then Dr. Kellogg, John Harvey Kellogg, there was this big in the Victorian era. There was this big push for masturbation caused all kinds of psychiatric diseases, clubfoot, and all kinds of things. And Dr. Kellogg was really obsessed with
how did Dr. Kellogg know this?
He didn't know shit, man. He just made it up in his fucking mind. I guess I don't know where he came up with it.
So almost really like the gospel writers, in other words.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Kellogg really popularized it and got it moved into the wealthy society because they come in this postmodernist movement, I guess, was the beginning of it. And there was a lot of sexual repression and
in the United States, in the United States only, or globally?
United States, as far as I know, but it started to catch on in Britain. But when they went to a national health service, they kind of washed that away because of financial limitations.
Right.
But in America, it caught on in the wealthy community. But it, my parents, my father and grandparents, they weren't, but they were born at home. And then it caught on after World War II. There were a lot of real prominent Jewish doctors
Yeah.
and in the sciences, and they started writing papers and doing studies, and they came up with all kinds of bullshit studies to justify it and everything.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think it was a Jewish conspiracy per se, but there tends to be a lot of coping that goes on with people that have been circumcised
Yeah.
that try to make excuses for it, have been beneficial for them,
Yeah.
and they make excuses for other people to do it too.
Mm.
And when you've got a large majority of smart Jew doctors that are working on it, it becomes a group think kind of thing.
Mm.
And that exists today in the medical community. As a matter of fact, there's a friend of mine, Peter Adler, on Facebook, my Facebook friend.
Peter
He's
Adler.
suing the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Peter
Yeah.
Adler.
He's suing the American Academy of Pediatrics now because
Why?
of religious influence in their policy
Oh yeah.
recommendations.
How far do you think he's going to get?
I don't know. I'm curious. It depends on the judge.
Well, how close a shot does you think he has?
From what I've heard from other people, it's pretty good because the brief that they're basing the lawsuit on was accepted by the Princeton Law Review and hasn't been disputed yet.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
they have
so
the
when
evidence.
when is this all going down? When's this all going down?
It's going down. Well, I don't know. They're looking for extensions in court to like try to prepare a brief because I mean he's got a long 60-page paper that it's based on.
Are you watching any?
And
yeah, I'm sorry. Carry on. Yeah.
there's a Dr. Andrew Friedman with Cedar Sinai. He's a religious Jew, and he circumcised his son on his kitchen table, and he was on the 2012 American Academy of Pediatrics Circumcision Policy Board, and he should have recused himself if he was practicing circumcision ritually and not just medically. He had a bias built in, and he should have recused himself.
Well, it doesn't sound like doesn't sound like he's caused any ripples because nobody else has said anything.
What was that?
I said it doesn't sound like he's caused any ripples by what he's done because nobody is complaining. Nobody said anything. I mean, I hear this the first time from you. That means to me that it's not exactly a talking point out in the general public.
That's really weird, I think.
Is it?
But yeah, there's another Jew friend of mine, Goldberg, that's suing the state of Massachusetts.
Why do you call him a Jew friend?
Because it disarms the trope that anyone that's trying to stop circumcision is doing it because they're anti-Semitic.
Well, anti-Semitic. What exactly does it mean to be anti-Semitic? I'm kind of starting to lose exactly what it means.
You know, me too, man.
Yeah, I mean
that's the accusation.
So
that's the accusation I'm yoked with all the time.
When you talk about trope, anti-Semitism is itself becoming a trope, but I can't quite put my finger on what it is.
I get you, and I'm accused of that all the time.
Okay, so we need to put an action committee together to investigate what anti-Semitism is.
I'd like to know because if somebody that's just wanting to stop Jews from hurting Jews and not hurt Jews.
Well, that's even something that we could have a hangout about where people would come in. We could all talk about what anti-Semitism is, and with me being somebody who doesn't know what it is, maybe I could make sense of it by the end of a conversation. So yeah, I'd be into that.
Yeah, that would be cool, man. That would be cool because it's really it's a slimy issue. But he's a psychologist, and if he sues and wins in the state of Massachusetts, which they filed for an extension to file another brief also,
Yeah.
and they filed two extensions, and he's got a good case, and his case is based on on Mr. Adler et al. Or whatever, the lawyer, his legal brief
That's
in the
incredible.
Princeton Review, I think.
Mm.
But all the legal work is on a website called circumcisionisfraud.com, or I have the video. I mirrored the video on my YouTube channel
Yeah.
and put the information on there. It's pretty astounding because they stopped the state from paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's like two generations of, because people, I found that if they have to pay for it out of their pocket, they won't pay for it. And it ain't but like $500, $300 to $500. That's that cheap. They'll say, screw it, I'm not paying for it. $300.
Petty, 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 petty.
It's really that easy, and it's like a mental virus. There's a lot of
A what? A mental virus?
yeah. The genital cutting is a mental virus.
Genital cutting. Yeah.
It wounds the ego, and it causes the person that's wounded, in order to protect their ego, to forward that injury, that hazing ritual.
Oh yeah.
Religiously or not, the psychology of it, I think, is the same.
I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about.
The like just to do it for no reason, for fashion to a kid, not religiously. The thing is, if Christians weren't doing it in America, and it was just only Jews, chances are the court system would make it illegal and stop the Jews from doing it. And I mean, that's just, the police would come in and say, okay, this party's over. You can't do this anymore. To the next one person that cuts a baby, going to fucking jail. Screw your religion. I mean, they do it. Soviet Union did it.
Somewhat did it?
They stopped it. The Soviet Union stopped it.
Union stopped it.
During the whole time.
Where?
Yeah, the Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union
Union
stopped it?
Russia.
The Soviet Union stopped circumcision? That's the first I hear of that.
Yeah, they made it illegal for Jews circumcised in Russia.
Huh.
They put Muslims in jail.
But that was 40 years ago. Sorry, 30 years ago.
Right. Right. They've started back. Yeah, they're beginning it again. But under the Soviet Union, they stopped.
You know, that I'm starting to understand the whole concept behind, soap operas, the TV series of soap operas, how the world turns day at a time, so on and so forth, whatever. Because it's exactly what reality is like. It's a fucking soap opera.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's weird. I mean, they've, the Muslims gave up Islam, their mosque. I saw a documentary one time where all their mosques were falling down, rotten buildings and everything. And all the Muslims were shaved their beards and were drinking. The women didn't wear any Muslim garb. They were just like, you couldn't tell they were Muslim. And after the Soviet Union fell, these religious imams started rebuilding the mosque and painting them up. And then people started going again. And then they gradually start wearing the Muslim garb, Muslim attire again. And the Jews start circumcising again. And all the same religious shit just pops back up. It's a fucking mental virus. It's an infection. I don't know what anybody can do about it other than just take draconian measures and tell people you can't do this.
Draconian measures, huh?
Yeah, lock them up.
Lock them up for what?
Cutting babies.
And then what do you do with the babies?
Well,
How do you
if
compensate?
you could
How do you
catch the mother, if you
compensate?
thought that,
How do you compensate the babies, and how do you punish the perpetrators? Tell me who gets what punishment?
well, in America,
No,
like if you assault someone
according to my friend Skeptic, who
in
gets?
Russia, I don't know, but I can tell you in America how it works. Like if you're in America and I cut you and you miss work or you're maimed or I inflict you with a mayhem injury, disabling a limb on your body, you'll
That's
get a fair market value judgment for that,
that is so not
and
nice
I
of
have to
you.
pay you. No, I'm just saying I'd have to pay you. I sue you, or I mean you sue me, the person that injured you, wounded you, and or assaulted you, and they pay for the injury.
Okay,
It doesn't restore the person, but it's compensation.
right,
That works. Now they don't have such a thing in Russia because they're not capitalists.
right.
I like suing in America. I don't even know if they had like a lawsuit, like a liability lawsuit, even existed in the Soviet Union. They may not have even been on the books. I don't know.
Right. I don't know either.
But here in America, if the American Academy of Pediatrics loses this lawsuit and these doctors and people get together and make class action lawsuits, all these people that say that, they're fine, I'm circumcised, I'm fine. If they find out that there's a potential that they'll get a paycheck, all of a sudden they won't be fine. You watch. They'll come out of the woodworks. They'll say, oh, yeah, I can't stand it. I want my check.
Okay, I want you to
Pay
tell
up.
me that. I want you to show me that.
And that's if it goes that way to where it goes to lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
People get money like this reparation things with the blacks. They come out of the woodworks. These people start talking about wanting reparations and stuff. And when the government starts paying a little bit, it motivates them to scream for more.
Well, who are you talking about? Because I'm getting confused with when you explain these American or the United States politics to me, it gets extremely confusing. So
It's
who's
dirty,
they?
man. It
Well,
is
who's they?
confusing.
Who's they?
Well, they are people that want to get paid, like just anybody that wants to claim to be a victim. If they find out there's a motive to get a check from the government, or like people faking lawsuits, they file frivolous lawsuits to get paid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
People will be
I don't
the
know.
circumcision thing.
I don't know how. Okay. I don't know how circumcision leads to people filing lawsuits for not getting paid. You know what I mean?
If this lawsuit wins
Mm-hmm.
by Peter Adler,
Yes. Where's he filing it?
people will be able.
Where's he filing it?
What state? Let me see. I'll look it up real quick.
What state?
I'll tell you. Let me tell you. I don't know.
Okay.
I'll find app part.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly going to start shutting this part down for the evening, I think. We'll just keep on yakking, no. If you don't mind.
That's cool.
All right.
Let me find there's a docket. Well, I found it, but I can't find a way to share the link. It's in Princeton. That's Massachusetts. I'm with you. I'm as well. God damn it. Damn, where you at? I can't. Okay, here we go. That's long. That's the best I could do because they have an app and I downloaded the app. So anytime I click on the link, it opens the app so I can give you the URL. That'll take you there. Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. It's activism's working. What it is a lot of people think that, they might think, it's not right or anything, but, that's the status quo and the system's bigger than me or you, and there's really no need, bucking the system. And they've got people, I guess that's the way to keep, animals calm. You beat the will to fight on. We got a whole nation of battered wives. I saw your birthday party. That was sweet. The birthday pictures. Happy birthday. That was sweet of them to do that. Right. That was very nice. Very cool. Right. Oh, my family's disintegrating. Frail and belligerent and in denial. Her frailty and the bleakness of our situation. Oh well, she believes in Jesus, but she's not counting on Jesus to help us out. But the reality of my piss poor condition and her imminent inability to do anything for herself, she won't accept, and it's making life difficult. Planning for me and everyone, planning for me and her and everyone because of her ego. It's hard. And my father just died. Everything's just bad. That's what this whole circumcision thing is for me. It's a fucking diversion from my own life. Because if I just tried, I'm limited in what I can only do so much to change my situation, and the rest of the time I'm just stuck, just staring at the wall or something or other. And there's only so many stupid conversations I can have with people about religion. That's, I still do a little of that, but this other shit is crazy. Fucking crazy. And I can actually see some benefit from my effort with this. If I can get to somebody, before they've done the deed to somebody else, it's a lot easier to talk to them. But if they've already done it, man, they'll go to the mat defending it. A lot of times it's like crazy. They just will not hear the message that it was an unnecessary thing to do. Fucking weird. Man, I'm gonna turn the lights off and try to go to sleep. Have you ever taken a magnesium citrate? Have you ever taken a magnesium citrate? It's a cathartic solution. It's a drink. It's really hypertonic with magnesium. It's magnesium. Yeah, it's like that. But it was phosphorus soda. A pint of it. I drank it about 2 hours ago. My bowels aren't working right. And I'm laying here, man. I feel like I'm about to explode. I'm aching, hurting. I don't know what the fuck. Hopefully, goddamn, I hope so. Man, I'm miserable, Sid. I got a belly full of scar tissue. We're gonna see a surgeon next Monday, and they're going to go in there and cut something. They've had to go in there and take scar tissue out more. But I'm telling you, man, I can't even hardly think straight. Sometimes I have trouble getting a deep breath because now my stomach is tight and spasming from the scar tissue. My bowels don't move right. It's fucking weird, man. Like being paralyzed just ain't enough, Crazy. All right, man. Take it easy. I'll talk to you tomorrow sometime. This lawsuit and these doctors and people get together and make class action lawsuits. All these people that say that, they're fine, I'm circumcised, I'm fine. If they find out that there's a potential